Hello, this is Graham. In this video, I want to explore the ways in which we classify emotions, why we do so, and why this might be considered controversial. The classification of emotions is an attempt to distinguish between one emotion and another. It's considered controversial largely because classifications are usually associated with theories about the origin and nature of emotions. There's a danger that just because the emotion is classified in a particular way and distinguished from similar emotional responses, people will assume that there's more significance to the distinction than there necessarily is. A quick warning. Be careful not to confuse the ways in which we classify emotions with the theories of how they arose. Undoubtedly, there will be similarities, but classification serves to distinguish, often to make it easier to understand something. It doesn't aim to explain. Just to remind you, there are two or three main threads of theory that attempt to explain the origin of emotions. Basic emotion theories assume that a core set, at least, of basic emotions evolved in our prehistory to help us survive in hostile environments. These are genetically transmitted individually and are therefore likely to be found in all human beings and probably map onto different areas of the brain. Constructed emotion theory, on the other hand, proposes that there is only one neurological pathway that evolved, and that when it is active, the brain draws on other information to provoke different emotional responses. As a result, potentially there will be strong social and cultural differences between the expression and interpretation of emotions among different communities. There are different ideas about how constructed emotion works. One, proposed by Swiss psychologist Klaus Scherer, is called component process model. The theory that there are 6 or 7 important processes that must occur sequentially for an emotion to be identified discretely. In particular, what are known as low-level cognitive appraisals. As we've discussed already, contemporary psychologists are moving towards an integrated approach drawing on both of these ideas. If discrete emotion theory is correct, all humans will have an innate set of basic emotions that are recognizable across cultures. They will have similar forms of expression through the face and other body movements and biological processes. Putting the biological basis of these emotions to one side, let's look at the classification of emotions. The earliest example of this approach was by William James in 1890, who recognized fear, grief, love, and rage. A popular example is that of Paul Ekman and his colleagues, whose cross-cultural study of 1992 concluded that there are 6 basic emotions: anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise. In 2014, Eugene Ban proposed a new type of theory to explain the potential for basic emotions, the semantic. He suggested that people transmit their understanding of emotions through the language that they use to describe them. He suggested that the more distinct language is used to express a certain emotion, then the more distinct the perception of that emotion is, and therefore it is likely to be considered basic. This approach then separates the labels that we use for emotions completely from their evolutionary or neurological processes. Ban is primarily a researcher and developer of natural language processing, a key element of AI, and has not been steeped in the theories of psychology. Most models of emotion are dimensional. They try to place all emotions in a position defined by 2 or 3 axes or scales. The first approach to this was by Wilhelm Wundt in 1897, whose 3 dimensions were pleasurable versus unpleasurable, arousing versus subduing, and strain versus relaxation. Nowadays, most dimensional models incorporate valence, a positive or negative dimension, and arousal or intensity. Several dimensional models of emotion have been developed, though there are just a few that remain as dominant ones currently with their own followers. Of these, the circumplex is probably the most predominant. Initially developed by James Russell in 1980, a modified version was published by Russell and Lisa Feldman Barrett in 1999. Around a core neutral, a core effect, which represents the common neurological pathway, various feelings based on emotional responses can be plotted. Robert Plutchik's hybrid approach recognized 8 basic emotions. He arranged these in concentric circles, initially according to their valence, i.e. their direction, towards the positive or the negative. He then considered each of the 8 by intensity. Finally, he considered how blends of basic emotions could form more complex ones, which he called dyads, and he arranged the 8 petals according to this blending. An emotional pair adjacent to one another is a primary dyad. One 2 petals apart is a secondary dyad, and 3 petals apart are a tertiary dyad. If his model reflects, rather than being based on, some kind of natural law, then it does provide an explanation for a hybrid approach to the origin of emotions, and for both fast and slow routes to processing them. Plutchik's approach is sufficiently comprehensive, yet quite easy to follow, that it lends itself to helping people to develop their emotional vocabulary, and so has been popular with therapists and practitioners. Over the last 20 years, researcher groups in different universities, mainly from psychology but also from AI, have developed ever longer lists of emotional responses. At some stage, attempts are made to translate these words, almost always from English into a variety of other languages, only to discover that there is no obvious translation for some of the words. This is taken as evidence of support of the idea that distinct emotions do not exist in every culture, and so the emotions can't have evolved through natural selection, only the mechanism for having an emotional response. Some researchers have therefore been dismissive of Plutchik's hybrid approach, arguing that although it is particularly useful, it is not scientifically accurate. The concern with this conclusion is that there has been limited contribution from cultural experts, especially anthropologists. Enter the user experience, or UX, research field. At first through behavioral economics, and then the gaming industry and virtual reality, and finally through more physical sectors such as cosmetics, and I'm glad to say the medical one, interest grew into the role of emotions in user experience, consumer choice, and health improvement pathways, due mainly to emotional stimulation. One of the leading groups in this work is at the University of Geneva, and in 2005 Klaus Scherer formed the Swiss Institute of Affective Science. Regardless of the theory of origin, what was crucial to this growth was the ability to be able to help people to express what feelings they had at a particular time. Scherer and his expanding team first devised what is known as the Geneva Emotion Wheel. Now in its 10th iteration, this has proved highly effective and is available as an open source tool for non-commercial use. However, commercial interests are global, and clinical needs affect many different nationalities, so the Geneva Emotion Wheel has now been comprehensively corroborated in more than a dozen languages. The debate about universal expressions of emotion then comes full circle. For the 20 named on the Geneva Emotion Wheel, there is clearly widespread recognition across many cultures. Thank you for listening. If you have any ideas for future videos or feedback about this one, please get in touch. Goodbye.